I'm Ann Rushing. I'm the Executive Director here at Sculpture Fields at Montague Park. And so I'm just going to tell y'all a little bit about the park. We're only 4 years old, so we're quite young. And what you'll see in here, in addition to things you see normally in a park, like spaces of grass to run around and people walking their dogs, like my dog Sadie here, who is really wanting to sniff this tree, you'll also see a lot of fine art sculpture. So the sort of sculpture you'll see here is what we call modern and contemporary, which means that it was made more recently. So it's not really old sculptures like you might see in picture books in the Louvre, where you might know like Michelangelo or things like that. Most of these sculptures have been made by people from all over the world, and they've been made in the last 80 years. And they use things like concrete, steel, iron, glass, and a lot of really kind of modern materials. So if you come out here, you can bring your dog, you can bring your family, you can wear a mask, and you can walk around. We have 33 acres, which means it's really big. So it's bigger than your backyard, and probably bigger than all your neighbors' backyards put together. And you can walk around, and we have 50 sculptures for you to look at. And you may not like every one of them, but you may find one you really like. And the only thing you have to do is not climb on them, because they're art pieces. So it's just like when you go to a museum, you don't touch the paintings or other sculptures in there. You don't climb on these sculptures, but you can get really close to them and look at them. So this piece is by Jason Kimes. It's called Inverted Left Hand. So inverted means something that's almost like a mirror image. So he was actually trying to make a left hand, but the process of making it, you end up making a mirror image of your piece. So what we have is a right hand, but it was still based on a left hand, so he calls it inverted left hand. So this piece is made out of core tin steel, which is why it looks the way it does, where it looks rusty. That outside finish, and finish is what we call the surface area after it's completely done, that'll stay like that, looking rusty, but it won't rust completely away. So this is a really good material for outdoor sculpture, because it has this really nice, pretty look, but you won't have to worry about the weather wearing your sculpture away really quickly. And so Jason makes these pieces by taking individual pieces of the steel, which you can see they're like little squares or rectangles, and he welds them together. And so he uses a big mold, or basically he made a giant hand out of a different material, probably wax or clay. He put something around it, so that's called casting it, so that he had a mold of it. And that mold he then used to weld all these little squares of metal together. And so welding is kind of like using really hot metal as glue to glue the different pieces of metal together. And it's a really interesting piece, and it's one that you definitely want to come up and get really close to, so you can see all the individual pieces, and then you can back way up and see how it looks like a human hand from far away. So this piece is by Linda Howard, and it's called Temple Mayan. So if you've ever seen a picture of a Mayan temple, or what's also called a ziggurat, you know that it's stair-stepped into a pyramid. So if you looked down from the top of it, what would you see? You'd see squares stacked on top of each other. So that's what you see here, is what it would look like if you were looking down on a Mayan temple, the stacked squares. Then Linda Howard, she took that idea and multiplied it to build her own kind of outdoor temple by taking those shapes and taking that way you look at it from on top and folding it up to the side. So this is a really fun piece, because you can walk inside it and through it. If you come, you can be on one side and your friends or parents can take your picture through it. And so this piece is made of aluminum, so the same thing as your pop cans or soda cans. And it's also painted white, and so we'll probably be repainting it here pretty soon so that it keeps this nice pretty white look. But when you get close, you can see, because it is outside, the weather does affect and change the sculpture. So from far away it may look perfectly pristine, and when you get up close you see that nature does take its toll on the pieces a little bit. And Howard is still making sculpture, and she's in her, I think she's 89. And so some sculptors who still work, a lot of artists will work until they're very old, and they may not even retire or stop working. So she'll have a team of assistants and other artists who will help her put these pieces together, so that she's not, you know, like maybe your grandmother or your great-great-grandmother. I don't know if you could picture them welding alone by themselves in a studio, but she has a lot of people to help her, to help make her work. So this piece right here is by John Henry, and so it's called Betty Davis Eyes. Now you may wonder, why is it called Betty Davis Eyes? It doesn't look like a person or any eyes or anything. Well, when John Henry was making this sculpture, when he finished it, there was a song playing on the radio called Betty Davis Eyes, which your parents may be familiar with. So he went, well, I guess that's what I'll call it. And so Betty Davis was a very famous actress, and she was still alive when he finished the piece. And so a newspaper reporter asked her about what she thought about this piece being named after her, and she said, "Do my eyes really look like that?" So the kind of moral of the story is, sometimes artists name their pieces after something they hear, something they see, or a moment in time, and it may not be what it looks exactly like. It may not have to be representational, so it may not have to represent something in the real world. So this piece is also very long, so it's one of our longest pieces, and it's one of the ones that we own in the park. So a lot of the pieces you may see change and go in and out because the artists have let us borrow them. And so that way we can always have new sculptures for you to look at when you come in. So this one we own, and John Henry actually is who helped found this park in the first place. Because if you can see behind me, that red brick building, he used to live there. And so he would look out and the park was empty and brown. It looked like a construction site where nothing was happening. So he went and talked to the mayor and to city council and to other important people in town, and he said, hey, why don't we put a sculpture park there, and I'll get all these sculptors I know to let us borrow pieces. And so we now own several pieces, and we have a lot of sculpture that has been borrowed. And we officially opened, like I said, 4 years ago, but John started working on this project way back in 2010 or 2011. So it's been in process for a long time, so that we now have this beautiful park. So this really big piece here is by Marc de Suvero, but his full name is Marco Polo de Suvero. And so if you know who Marco Polo is, he was a great explorer. And so in that way, he shares something with this Marc de Suvero. So in the 60s was when art was really, really changing, and that's why we say we have modern and contemporary sculpture, because the things we have aren't classical. So when Mr. de Suvero was learning how to make sculpture, he learned how to make things that were, you know, very figurative, very traditional, they would look like something you would look at it and you'd be like, oh, that's a person. That looks like a person, or that looks like a tree. And so he learned how to do all that, and then he went, okay, now I know how to do that. I want to break the rules. I want you to see how the sculpture is made. So you'll see the rivets and the big screws and the big bolts and nuts on the sculpture. You'll see the cutting marks where he used a plasma torch to cut these shapes and holes in it. And it's all very rough still. And you'll see that it's twisted and bent. And so it's almost like a doodle or something done in steel. So he likes to really play with the idea of when, you can see how this sculpture is made, you can see everything I did to it, and you can imagine whatever you want to and create whatever story you want to from these shapes that I've created. And it was a whole different way to look at sculpture at that point in time. And it's how most of the artists here work in sculpture now. Well, the sun's coming out now, so I'm going to put on my sunglasses. So this piece is called Ardent. And so this is by an artist who has come and worked here. He's worked for John Henry. He works for other sculptors across the country, and he's based in Lexington, Kentucky. So his name is Andrew Light. And so we've talked about representational sculpture, like the hand, where it looks like what it is. Non-representational sculpture, which has been, I think, all the others, which were Marco Polo de Soubra's piece and John Henry's piece. And then we talked a little bit about abstraction. So abstraction is where you take a real thing, like a hand, or the Mayan temple, or maybe Winged Victory, something like that, and you recreate it in a way that plays with those shapes and those lines so that it may not look like anything. If you've seen any work by Pablo Picasso, that's abstraction. You can tell there's a person in the painting, but it doesn't look like a person normally looks. It doesn't look exactly like a photograph of them. So this piece by Andrew Light, he's told me, because he comes and he helped install it, and I have pictures of him with the crane, coming and lowering it in place. So we have to use all sorts of big equipment to move the pieces in and out. So if you like trucks and cranes and big machines, sculpture is definitely the sort of thing that you want to come and get involved in when you're a little bit older. And so he takes these shapes and builds out forms that you might see a bird, or you might see, a lizard. You could see an airplane or any sort of thing, because he bases it on the shapes that he makes on something real, and then takes it out to the abstraction where it doesn't look like that thing anymore. But luckily it means that you can imagine whatever you want when you walk around it. So this very tall piece is called Anchors. And so if you look all the way up the height, you may wonder, how did that piece, which is as tall as maybe a 3 or 4 story building, get to the park? Well, if you look along this big hill here that it's sitting on top of, you can see that the hill is almost as long as the piece is tall. So this piece was actually made here in the park on site by Peter Lundberg. So this piece is also a special piece in that it's a memorial piece. So the artist, Peter Lundberg, made this to honor the fallen 5. So these are some servicemen who ended up getting killed in an accident. And so to remember them, Peter Lundberg built this sculpture. So inside, so it's made out of concrete, and the concrete is lined with special sort of steel called rebar that keeps it structurally strong. And then it also has 5 ship anchors in it, 1 for each of these men. And then at the base, also in the concrete, are 1,000 folded paper anchors with memories and well wishes for these soldiers and their families. And so now it's our tallest piece, and it's our only piece that has lighting. So when you drive past on the interstate, or you drive down 23rd Street with your parents, or on Polk Street at night, you can see this piece any time of the day or night. And they had to dig the shape into the hill, cast the concrete, so that means they poured in the concrete and everything that was going to be put inside it. And then they had to wait 6 weeks for it to set. And then I think they waited another 2 weeks just to be sure. And then they got 3 cranes out here to pull it all the way up and make it stand up straight. And it actually has a little bit of a lean if you look at it. But about 1/3 of the sculpture is actually underground to help it stay upright. And so it's a really fun one. What's really great is when you come here, I know I said not to climb on this sculpture, but you can come up and touch this piece and feel the different textures. You can feel what was actually in the ground and lined with a special kind of plastic wrap. Or you can feel how the rocks and the concrete kind of lifted to the surface. So there's a lot of different textures that you can feel when you come here with your friends or with your mommy and daddy. So it's a really interesting piece, and it's so tall you should get your picture taken underneath the arch.
Well, that concludes our tour. A big thank you to Ann Rushing and to Sadie. Thank you so much. This is a beautiful place, and we look forward to coming in person soon.